Hello, good evening, welcome. Welcome to Zatoun's and Beit Zatoun's first webinar event. We are very pleased to be hosting this to the Zatoun community across Canada and also to the Beit Zatoun community that is centered in the Toronto area. Both work hand in hand to bring to Canadians a sense of the grassroots and social justice in all its myriad ways. And so today we're very pleased to be holding this event. And I'm not going to mince words. I am shamelessly plugging for Dimitri Lascaris, who I have come to know as a colleague, as a friend, and someone who is capable of making great changes to this country's politics. I really want to believe that politics can be better in this country, that politicians can be honorable, and that we as Canadian citizens and residents can have trust and have a voice in our parliament. So for these reasons, Beit Zatoun and Zatoun have been working to bring this event as an opportunity to introduce Dimitri Lascaris to the community. Many of you may have already heard or know of Dimitri. In fact, you would have received some newsletter items over the last probably 2 months, making mention of Dimitri's campaign. And here's an opportunity for us to ask him some questions, hear some more details directly from him. I just want to say also before we begin that I hope that you have invited your friends and family and network to this event, because I think the success of Dimitri is going to be with in our hands as the grassroots community. I call him, he may not agree with this, but I call him as the grassroots candidate. And I believe that he will be victorious when we get behind him, because he's the guy who I believe is not the establishment person. He's the person who will be speaking for the grassroots. And I believe that he has done that over numerous occasions. And so for me, he has proven that he is committed to social justice, not just for Palestine, which is of course very important to the Zatoun community and the Beit Zatoun community, but we are a larger community with a larger focus for social justice for everyone, economic equality, and many other types of issues. He's also courageous. He has proven that he's willing to take on the establishment, take on much larger players, much more powerful players, and because of his capacity and capability to win. So for all these reasons, I am so happy that we can bring him here today. So before we begin, what I'd like to do, well, I mean, I didn't say it, and I should say it, is we're here, of course, because Dimitri is running in the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Originally, when Dimitri was thinking about it, and he told me about his intention, I kind of said, no, you can't do this because you've been such a game changer for Palestine. And he has been. But Dimitri believes that he can do more for Palestine as a voice on Parliament Hill in a federal party. And I fully respect that, and I have every faith that Dimitri will continue to be a game changer in this way, in a new capacity. So my hopes are for a victory, and I ask for your help and cooperation in this. Through the webinar, you will notice a few perhaps slides that come up that are asking you to do a few things. One is join the Green Party if you are already not a member of the Green Party, so that you can vote for the leader. Donate to Dimitri's campaign, because that is very much needed, as you can imagine. It costs lots of money to be flying from east to west over and over to meet with people, to understand people, and to introduce them. And finally, to share. Please share your enthusiasm, share your opinion of Dimitri with friends and family, because that's how the grassroots works. The grassroots works just out of network, out of people being each other's best friend and each other's best spokesperson. So those are the three things that we'd like you to focus on in the sense of actions and what you can do. There's a fourth one that you can do, and that is to actually volunteer for Dimitri's campaign in terms of making phone calls and other capacities. So all these items will be covered. Okay, so this town hall is set up as a broadcast webinar to minimize disruptions and hacking. We have moderators who will be monitoring Zoom and Facebook. We plan to be on YouTube, but unfortunately the connection did not work. So we're on just those two, Zoom and Facebook. And you can submit questions on either one of those, and we will be asking them after we give Dimitri an opportunity to tell us about himself and his campaign. But before we start, before we begin, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just review a little bit of Dimitri's, what I call Dimitri's credentials and the things that he has done on the issue of Palestine in Canada that to me has shown his capacity, his commitment and capability. So in August 2016, while Justice Critic in the shadow cabinet of the Green Party of Canada, he and along with others introduced a resolution to support the aims of BDS at the party's convention. It was overwhelmingly passed by the membership. However, that resolution was opposed by the party leadership. They disqualified it, and he was forced to resign his position in the shadow cabinet. But he and others fought to bring back the resolution at a special meeting in December of 2016, and there again, it was passed by an overwhelming margin. So that resolution stands as the only unequivocal statement of support for the aims of BDS by any federal Canadian political party. And also, Dimitri is in the midst of suing B'nai B'rith, and we all know B'nai B'rith as a very powerful organ of the Israel lobby in Canada. He is suing them for defamation, and he successfully beat back a charge to throw it out of court on a strategic lawsuit against public participation charge. He got the court to agree that yes, talking about B'nai B'rith and their tactics is in the public interest. So that suit is still pending. And another terrific action by Dimitri was he acted pro bono as the lawyer for David Kattenberg in a major court case heard in May of 2019 regarding an illegal settlement in the West Bank. So for instance, what happened there was that the, hello folks, I hope you are back online with us. We had a technical glitch here. Somehow Zoom ended the entire call and we lost everybody. So we are in the process of trying to regain the connection. We're kind of here, but now we've got to get everybody back on. And we hope that people will be arriving to do that. So if we can give them a couple of more minutes now that we're back on, and hopefully people are using their own ingenuity and desire to be back on with us. So let's have a couple of minutes wait, I guess. I wonder if Zoom is like radio, dead air is a no-no. Well, maybe I'll just keep talking and we'll get to talk to Dimitri immediately after we have some people back on. And it looks like we've got 32 people back on. Is that the case? Okay, welcome back. Thank you so much for being persistent and being back with us. So let's just take up where we left off. We've lost a few minutes here, but that's okay. So just to end it here, and so we can get on with Dimitri, I just want to say how much Dimitri has done. I think people know that. And I just want to speak to the people who know me out of my work with Zatoun and Beit Zatoun over these last 16 years. Can't believe it's 16 years. I I just want to say that I am entirely behind Dimitri, and I hope that you can, for yourselves, get behind him as well. Do what you need to do in terms of research and looking into Dimitri's platform. And I am absolutely sure that he will be the person who will support your views. Thank you. Dimitri, could you please tell us something about, who you are, why you're running, and the platform that you will be bringing to us?
Sure, Robert. I can't, first of all, I'm moved by the wonderful things you said about me. I hope I deserve half of the things you said about me, because that would be pretty damn good, even half. So really, brother, from the moment that I've met you, you have been an ally and a mentor in many ways. And the very first time I met you was not in the context of Palestine. I believe the very first time I met you was when I was invited to speak at Beit Zatoun about the austerity crisis in Greece, and I was asked to join with the estimable Professor Leo Panich, who very, very closely followed that crisis. There's so many, there's so many bonds between the oppressed peoples of this world. In many ways, Greeks have been oppressed, although in the modern era, not nearly as badly as the Palestinian people have been oppressed. The Palestinian people, as I've come to understand in my lifetime, are amongst the most brutalized of vulnerable populations in this world. And our government, this state, from the very moment of the Nakba, and even before, has borne a tremendous amount of complicity in the suffering of the Palestinian people. And throughout it all, you have been a champion of the Palestinian cause. Not only have I come to understand your humanity in that regard, but in so many other ways, you have been an outspoken defender of human rights. And I cannot express my appreciation enough for your support, Robert. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to call you friend. And by the way, you make great olive oil. you'll be, and I'm not plugging your olive oil, Robert, but I have to say I have that olive oil every day because I'm a Greek and I have to have olive oil on my meals. And Zatoun has become a staple of our diet, olive oil. Thank you very much. So one thing I want to just touch on that you mentioned in your gracious comments. It is true that I believe that if I become the leader of the Green Party of Canada, I can do more for the Palestinian cause, but I believe I can do more for the cause of all oppressed peoples as a member of the Green Party of Canada, and including the Indigenous peoples of this country, including many peoples in sub-Saharan Africa who are suffering from oppression that ultimately traces back to a very hegemonic, ruthless, and materialistic foreign policy of the United States government. In so many ways, the United States government really is at the heart of so much of the injustice we're seeing in this world today. Of course, it's not the only actor that is to blame. There are many governments that have a profound complicity in the suffering we see in this world, but a lot of it has to do with the US government. And as the leader of the Green Party of Canada, one of the things that I intend to do is to shed a light on the nefarious nature of our relationship to the US government, the fact that in many ways our government has been a vassal of the US government in the post-World War II period, and that we have diminished our credibility on the international stage. We have really besmirched the name of human rights and international law by, for example, claiming that we stand up for human rights while at the same time selling deadly weapons to the Saudi autocracy, allowing products from Israel's illegal settlements to enter into this country with preferential tariff treatment. Not only do we allow them to come in, but we accord to them preferential tariff treatment by perpetuating the suffering of the indigenous peoples in this country. And I could go on and on and on. We do a lot of these things because we have not plotted a truly principled and sovereign and independent foreign policy. And one of my primary goals as leader of the Green Party of Canada is to talk to Canadians and start a really honest conversation about what a principled and humanitarian and peaceful foreign policy would actually look like. Because we're not even having that conversation. Like, when was the last time you heard anybody stand up in Parliament and question whether we should withdraw from NATO? You can't even raise the question without being characterized as somebody on the fringe of the political spectrum. But this is a very legitimate question. You know, when is the last time somebody stood up in Parliament and said that we should be slashing our military expenditures dramatically, you know, by on the order of 50%, which is something that I've been calling for, and reallocating that money to a rapid transition to a sustainable economy, and to supporting people who are falling through the cracks, and to helping people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis. You can't even talk about dramatic reductions in military spending in this country without being demonized. So these are conversations that we have to have. And as leader of the Green Party of Canada, I would be in a position to force these issues onto the agenda in a way that I can't as an activist, in the way that any of us can as activists. At the end of the day, for us to achieve a just world, we have to acquire political power. We have to seize the reins of power, and we have to bring that power to bear for the good of humanity rather than for the good of a few ruthless and ultra wealthy people, which is what we have today in the world. And it's leading us down the path of extinction ultimately if we continue going the direction that we're going. So that's why I'm running to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada. I don't think winning is going to be easy, but it definitely is within the grasp of our campaign. You know, there are 9 candidates. They've thrown a lot of obstacles at us, Robert, as you well know. There are 9 candidates, and we're in second place in fundraising. And even more importantly, we're in second place by a wide margin in the number of donors. The average level of our donation is significantly below that of the establishment candidates, you know, 2 of whom have come over from the Liberal Party. So when we look at the average size of our donation, the number of our donors, where we stand in terms of fundraising, and look at all of that in the light of the obstacles that we've had to overcome. Because, for example, the vetting committee initially rejected my application to be an official leadership contestant. And I had to appeal that, and we won on the appeal. But that's something that basically put our campaign in a state of suspension for an entire week as we dealt with the appeal. That was a significant disadvantage that we had to overcome. And still we're there, we're in second place. We are in the running, we're in the heat of it. And I feel like we're having tremendous momentum. We have people coming over from the NDP. We have people coming over from the progressive wing of the Liberal Party. We have people engaging in party politics for the first time in their adult lives because they felt that this was a system in which they had no stake, that had abandoned them. There is a movement growing here. I know it sounds cliche to say it, but it is a movement. And I cannot, you know, urge people on this call strongly enough to become engaged, because ultimately, if we're going to seize the reins of power, we have to do it. We have to reward the politicians who are willing to speak truth to power and give them a voice in the political, hierarchy of this country. Give them the bully pulpit. Let them stand there on the national stage and say the things that nobody else is willing to say. The mere fact that these conversations will begin, because they're not being had now, the mere fact that they will begin will be a game changer. So that's why I've thrown my hat into the ring, and that's why I'm asking people on this call tonight. And I thank you all for taking the time to speak to us to support the campaign in any way you can.
Okay, absolutely. I believe that you're the guy to do all that, and that's why we're here. Do you want to move to questions right now, or do you want to say a few things about some key priority items that you've got in your platform before we go to Q&A?
I'll probably elaborate a little bit. I talked a lot about foreign policy, but I don't want people on this call to think that that's all that this candidacy is about, that this campaign is about. We take a holistic approach to the question of social justice, peace, and sustainability. And we see that in our campaign, and by the way, the people on my team are unbelievable. I have a platform committee, for example, and you know, there are many people contributing in many ways, of persons, you know, who have distinguished careers in academia, in activism, in the climate movement, in Green Party politics. So for example, we have Radhika Desai, who is a strongly progressive academic from the University of Manitoba heading our platform committee. We have Rowan Miller, who is a young candidate from the Maritimes who's done amazing work, who for the first time in his life as a 22-year-old had a great result on the Maritimes in the last election. We have Alan Freeman, who was an economics advisor to the mayoralty of Ken Livingstone in London in the United Kingdom. These are the kinds of people, and you know, there are so many others I haven't mentioned. And what we do is we have a collaborative discussion, which I largely stay out of, because they know what my politics are. I don't need to insert myself into the discussion, and allow them to have vigorous debates until they can reach a consensus on things like workers' rights, economic justice, reform of the justice system. And then they present to me what is their consensus view. And they've been coming up with such brilliant work that I barely have to, suggest a revision to what they've written. So these are the kinds of people who are on our campaign team, and what they put out, for example, outside the sphere of foreign policy, is a workers' rights platform, which Sid Ryan, the former president of the Ontario Federation of Labor, has said is leagues beyond anything he has seen from the federal NDP or provincial NDP and that workers' rights platform includes, for example, sorry, there's a little bit of background noise. That workers' rights platform includes, for example, a maximum spread between executive compensation and worker compensation of 10-1, so that executives can no longer, earn in the range of 100, 150 times what workers earn in the corporation. It mandates worker representation on the boards of public companies. Our platform is calling for workers' claims in corporate insolvency to be first in line, so that, ahead even of secured creditors and banks, so that their pensions are protected and they're not left out in the cold if the corporation fails. We also have an economic justice platform that is calling for a top marginal tax rate of 75% on the highest income earners in Canada. It's not well known, it's not discussed in the corporate media, but for much of the post-World War II period, the top marginal tax rate in Canada, the United States, was over 90%. And this was a period that coincided with, the most prosperous part of our history, both here in Canada and the United States, in the post-World War II period. So a 75% top marginal tax rate is not, by any stretch of the imagination, unusual by historical standards. In fact, it is modest by historical standards. And yet nobody in Parliament is calling for a top marginal tax rate at that level. And I'm doing something which no one in my memory in Canada has done, and that's to call explicitly for the elimination of billionaire status and taxing billionaires out of existence. So I think we should be putting an upper limit, a fixed upper limit on how much wealth a person can accumulate, and taxing gains above that limit at the rate of 100%. To me, that's a real wealth tax, not a 1% wealth tax, which does little more than slow down the rate at which the ultra wealthy accumulate more wealth. So these are the types of things I'm bringing forward, and it's starting a really interesting conversation, and people are beginning to, I feel in my interactions with people, that they're beginning to understand what is possible. Because the range of permissible discourse in this country is so narrow. So something that, Noam Chomsky discussed so brilliantly in his writings about the American media, that what is permitted to be said before one gets characterized as an extremist, as somebody, who's outside the realm of reason, is so narrow that we can't have the conversations we need to have in order to build a just and sustainable society. So that's just a sense of what we have brought forward as a campaign team, and we're going to be bringing out a lot more in the days ahead on Indigenous rights, women's rights, an ecological environmental plan. And I urge you all, if you have a few minutes, to familiarize yourselves with the various aspects of our platform on teamdimitri.ca. Just click on the button for the platform section, and you'll find out, I think you'll come to understand very quickly that we have started a different kind of conversation, one that's desperately needed in Canadian politics.
Thank you, Dimitri. So I just wanted to reiterate that the time is getting short, in the sense that if people want to vote in the leadership race, there is a deadline of September the 3rd. So people must have joined membership in the Green Party by September 3rd in order to be able to vote for the leader beginning, I think it is September the 26th to October the 3rd. So we do have a deadline, folks, of September the 3rd. That's basically 3 weeks away, to join as a member of the Green Party, and also to enroll other people, as many people as you can, friends and family in your network, to consider joining the Green Party so that they can vote for the leadership. because otherwise they won't be able to vote for Dimitri past that date. So let's move on to questions and answers, Q&A here. If I can invite everyone to pose their question via chat, and there are people monitoring who will pass the questions on to me. I will repeat the question with as much information as I can that's provided, and we'll go one by one and have Dimitri respond to them. So could you please start posing your questions? And these could be on any matter that Dimitri has to answer to. I mean, they could be political, foreign affairs or policy. They could be healthcare, on the environment. I mean, the environment is a very, very big one, certainly coming from the Green Party. It will have to be up front and center in the discussion. So we'll wait for that. And then I will go from there. So are the questions coming in? Actually, maybe I'll get started and there'll be other questions to come along. Dimitri, the Zatoun community is definitely a leftist one. It is one that is clearly in the left, that has been there for a long time. And many of the existing members of our community are members of the NDP. And so they kind of say, well, I'm already a member of NDP, I'm committed, and therefore I can't play a role. Can you speak to why your leadership candidacy is important to them, even though they're committed to the NDP?
Well, I think people should be committed to a program and to a set of values, not to a political party. A political party is ultimately a means to an end. It isn't an end in itself. And so when you think about, if you're a member of the NDP or any other political party, do I want to get behind this particular candidate from another party, one that I haven't historically supported? What I think the right way to pose the question is, what is the best way for me to advance the objectives that I have as a member of the society? And what is the best way for me to help achieve the kind of world I want to see? And so you should be looking at the program behind the candidate. What am I advocating for? And compare it to what the NDP is advocating for. Now, I've already mentioned, Sid Ryan, who looked at my workers' rights platform, and the NDP. This is the thing that the NDP has really carved out for itself, the role of the champion of organized labor. And he's saying, this is somebody who is himself a champion of organized labor, an outspoken defender of workers' rights, who has, who's proven his commitment to Canadian workers over a period of a lifetime. And he's saying, as a person who ran for the NDP and came close to running for the leadership of the NDP, that he's not seeing a workers' rights platform, anything like this from the federal NDP or any NDP, any provincial NDP. That says something about the nature of the policies and programs that our campaign is putting forward. Also, I know that the left wing of the NDP is, very committed to the idea that Canada should get out of NATO. Well, I'm saying that explicitly. Canada should get out of NATO. Where's the NDP on getting out of NATO? The NDP used to be unabashedly socialist. I'm saying explicitly that I'm an eco-socialist. I'm not hiding it. I'm not running away from it. I'm not afraid to say it. And I get flack for saying it because people will use this to paint me out as some sort of extremist or Stalinist. I'm willing to have that discussion. I'm not going to run away from it. The NDP leadership, not the base, the leadership has run away from that discussion. Is the NDP advocating for a 75% top marginal tax rate? Not even close. Is the NDP talking about taxing billionaires out of existence? I imagine that is an idea that has a tremendous amount of appeal to the base of the NDP, and especially to the left-leaning base of the NDP. Can you imagine Jagmeet Singh saying such a thing? We're going to tax billionaires out of existence? Would you imagine Tom Mulcair saying such a thing? So look at the policies that our campaign represents first and foremost. And even after that, if you can't get your head around the idea of leaving the NDP and joining the Green to support us, think about what having at the head of the Green Party of Canada, a person saying the things that I'm saying, would force the NDP leadership to have to do. It would have no alternative but to shift left. It would have no alternative but to return to the party that it once was. The party of Tommy Douglas, the party of socialism, because if it didn't, it would slowly be wiped out. So as a matter of survival, the leadership of the party will have to shift. And it's not just the NDP that's going to have to shift left. Trudeau will have to shift left. The leadership of the Liberal Party will have to shift left. I have people on my campaign team who are lifelong liberals, and they've come to me and they've said, we're very, very frustrated by what our government, Trudeau is doing. We believed in him. He's turned out to be a sellout. And we think that by supporting you, you're going to force the leadership of the Liberal Party to become much more progressive. So you can move the entire conversation in the direction you want it to go, even if you're still committed to the NDP on a long-term basis, by helping in some way to support my campaign. You could do it, as Rob said, if you can't bring yourself to joining the Green Party, and I think you should, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. You can do it by donating. You can do it by becoming a volunteer. You can do it by spreading word of our campaign, asking others who aren't irrevocably committed to some other political party to join. There's many ways you can help, and it'll be good for all of Canadian politics if you did that. And the last thing I want to say is, becoming a member of this party or any other party it's not a lifelong commitment. So if you become a member of this party and you're not happy with the outcome, a centrist candidate wins. Or let's suppose that and I promise you this isn't going to happen, but let's suppose that I win and I give up and I don't, I give up the fight and I don't push hard for these programs and these policies that I'm putting forward. Or I'm just simply, my efforts are defeated by persons who oppose that kind of a program. You're free to leave the party and go back to whatever party it is that you feel better represents you. It's not a lifelong commitment you're making. You're getting involved in this struggle here and now, and play it by ear, see how it unfolds. And if you're not happy with the outcome, you will be free to return to whatever party you feel best represents you. But I think you will be happy with the outcome.
Thank you, Dimitri. I'm sure we will be happy with it, and we're hoping for it. So here we have some questions. Question here, and this, you don't have to take a long time to respond to this, but someone in Winnipeg wants to know about your comments about today's deal between the Emirates and Israel.
Well, I think this is a disgrace for the regime, the brutal regime that's governing the United Arab Emirates. This is a regime, by the way, as many of you will know, that is part of the Saudi coalition, which has laid waste to Yemen, creating one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. This is a profoundly undemocratic regime. It's a regime that is extremely abusive of human rights, that's destabilizing the region. In one sense, it's no surprise that this has happened, given the nature of that regime, but it really speaks to the fact that the Palestinian people have been cynically exploited by autocratic regimes in the Middle East in order to curry favor with the population and dampen down popular resistance to these autocratic regimes. We now see the true face of the autocratic regimes of the Arab world, like that of the UAE. They are no friend of the Palestinian people. They clearly are not concerned ultimately, and they've been playing this cynical game, as I mentioned, in order to advance their own narrow interests. So I think ultimately we should just stop pretending that the Saudi Arabias of this world and the Egyptian regime and the UAE are particularly concerned about the fate of the Palestinian people. They're not, and we all globally around the world, so many of us who care about this issue, have to come together at a grassroots level to defend their interests.
Thank you, Dimitri. A question. What would you do about the RCMP's illegal occupation of the Wet'suwet'en land and their militarized abuse of Indigenous people?
Well, I'm calling for a 50% reduction in the funding of the RCMP over a 5-year period. I'm strongly supportive of the concept of defunding the police. And furthermore, I think that we have to, when we're talking about the Wet'suwet'en people in particular, I think they should get off the lands of the Wet'suwet'en people. We should implement the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that means, amongst other things, that they should have a veto, an absolute veto over the exploitation of their lands. And if they say no, no is no. Right now we have this game in which we engage and we say, well, if we consult you in good faith, that's enough. And if you don't like the outcome, too bad for you. That's not true respect for Indigenous rights. We can consult them all we want. If the answer at the end of that consultation is we don't want this in our land, then it will not happen on your land.
Thank you, Dimitri. Another question here. What is your opinion of the carbon tax and dividend, the price of pollution?
Well, I think we absolutely have to put a price on pollution. It has to be a robust price on pollution, because right now the fossil fuels industry and so many other industries are foisting upon us the costs of their activities and taking the profits, not sharing them with society in an equitable manner. The only way to force them to bear the cost of their own production is to put a price on it and to oblige them legally to pay. So I'm fully supportive of the carbon tax and a dividend arrangement. I think that the carbon tax we have now has far too many loopholes in it. I don't think it's high enough. It's certainly not going to get us to where we need to be within the time that the scientific community tells us we have to act. So ultimately, a price on pollution is an absolutely essential component of resolving the climate emergency, but there's so much more that we have to do. That's only part of the puzzle.
Thank you. A question here is, what is your position on the sanctions that Canada has imposed on 20 countries, especially as it might affect these countries to deal with the current pandemic?
Well, there's several principles in my foreign policy platform around the whole notion of sanctions. And the way that I approach the subject is this. First of all, every diplomatic, non-violent, and when I say violent, I'm not just talking about military violence, I'm talking about economic violence. Every non-violent method to resolve a crisis, a set of human rights violations, a conflict, should be exhausted before there's any kind of an escalation, whether economic or militarily. And too often in our world today, diplomacy is not given a full opportunity. And sometimes it's not even attempted at all, especially by the United States government. So that's number one. Number two, when we decide that all diplomatic options have been exhausted, then we resort not to military violence. The next step should be economic sanctions, but those sanctions should be applied strictly to the human rights abusers and not have impacts upon innocent populations. Thirdly, all sanctions regimes or military action taken to bring an end to injustice, which should rarely, if ever, be done, should be applied universally. So there should be no exemptions, no free pass for anybody. And finally, the sanctions regime that is put in place should be proportionate to the wrong and should only be left in place for as long as is absolutely necessary to bring an end to the injustice. So that's the general approach that I take to the whole question of sanctions. Canada fails at every one of those levels. It does not exhaust diplomatic options before resorting to sanctions. It does not confine itself to sanctions that affect human rights abusers and do not cause suffering to innocent populations. It does not use sanctions that are proportionate and keeps them in place longer than is necessary to achieve the desired outcome. And finally, and most importantly, it does not apply them universally. And so the classic example of this, to me, the most egregious example of this hypocrisy, this double standard, is that Canada has imposed sanctions on Russia because it says Russia annexed Crimea. What happened in Crimea? What happened to Crimea, which was part of part of Russia for a long time historically, after a coup in the Ukraine, a Western-oriented coup that was partly orchestrated by the United States, held a referendum. And in the referendum, in which there was a greater than 80% turnout, in excess of 90% of the persons who voted said that they wanted to merge with the Russian Federation. And that happened. And then Western governments, including Canada, imposed sanctions. In Israel, Israel annexed East Jerusalem over 30 years ago in flagrant violation of international law. There was no referendum held in East Jerusalem amongst Palestinians whether they wanted to be part of the state of Israel. And of course, if that had happened, it's inconceivable that a majority of Palestinians, let alone over 90%, would have voted to be integrated into the state of Israel. It's inconceivable. And yet what has happened to Israel? Not only have we not imposed sanctions, we've deepened our trade relationships with Israel. We trade in arms with Israel. We vote against United Nations resolutions condemning Israel. There could hardly be a more dramatic demonstration of the hypocrisy of Canadian foreign policy and the double standard of Canadian foreign policy and sanctions policy than a comparison of the Crimea situation to the situation in East Jerusalem. And now it's even going further. We see Netanyahu is talking openly about annexing large swaths of the West Bank. The annexation project continues. And why? Because we've given Israel a free pass. So what possible reason could a Netanyahu have for fearing the outcome or the consequences of another annexation? You know, we've basically sent a message to the state of Israel. You can do whatever you want and get away with it. This was an inevitable outcome of the impunity that Western governments, including Canada's government, have conferred upon Israel.
Thank you, Dimitri. So following up with the foreign policy, there's a question here about Venezuela. What is your view regarding Venezuela and our government's involvement? So here's a case where we've actually gone way beyond sanctions and are a direct player in what's happening in Venezuela.
Look, I've been quite critical of Canadian government policy in Venezuela. I went, you know, last year after the Canadian government, you know, as part of leading this Lima group, and I'll say a word about that in a moment, the Lima group, declared the charlatan Juan Guaido to be the president of Venezuela, even though he's never been elected by the people of Venezuela to be the president. I went down to Caracas myself as a journalist for the Real News. And I did that at my own expense. And I found a guide, and I asked the guide to take me to parts of Caracas where the people were predominantly opposed to the government of Nicolas Maduro. And I asked them to take me to parts of the capital where there were predominantly sympathetic. There was a great deal of sympathy towards the government of Nicolas Maduro. So I tried to hear from everybody. And what I saw was dramatically different from what I was hearing. First of all, the levels of support that I saw for the Maduro government were much higher than we were being led to believe. Another thing I saw, I took part, I didn't take part, I observed and I walked along with a huge procession of protesters, anti-Maduro protesters, as they were marching to their point of assembly. And they were hurling the worst insults at Maduro and at his family members, openly calling for his ouster, openly calling for the military to remove him from power. They were urging, in effect, a coup d'etat. And I did not see a single riot police officer anywhere. In Montreal, where I live, if 20 climate protesters get together and raise a stink peacefully, you're going to see more riot police sometimes than you'll see protesters. And here I was in Caracas, where people were openly calling for the military to overthrow the elected government, and I couldn't see a single person, a single police officer dressed in riot gear. I didn't see any tear gas. I saw absolutely no effort to put down the protest. And then that same day, I went off and I saw another protest that was held in favor of the Maduro government, and it was every bit as robust and passionate as the one I had seen by the opponents. So the picture that I got was very different. And at the end of the day, you know, whatever one may say about the government of Nicolas Maduro, whatever one can say about the human rights situation in Venezuela, no one can reasonably argue that it is worse than it is in Colombia, which is the deadliest country in the world for land defenders by a wide margin. No one can say that it's worse than Honduras, which I also visited last year as part of a human rights delegation. 70% of the population is living in poverty there. The government of Juan Orlando Hernandez openly, brazenly stole the last election, is extremely repressive. As part of a human rights delegation, I was tear gassed when I was interviewing peaceful protesters on a bridge. No one can say that the government of Nicolas Maduro is less respectful of human rights than Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil. And guess what? All of these characters, Ivan Duque of Colombia, Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, and Hernandez of Honduras are part of the Lima group. Who are we kidding? I mean, they're insulting our intelligence. They're telling us that the Lima group was assembled in order to defend the human rights of the Venezuelan people. I mean, this would be comical if it weren't actually having devastating impacts on the lives of real people.
Thank you, Dimitri. A question here about proportional representation as a voting system. What is your position? And perhaps if you can express a preference to how that might work.
I'm fully supportive of proportional representation. We're about to issue a statement about that. I favor the mixed member proportional representation system. I think that it yields outcomes that are far more democratic and representative. And I think the system we have now is profoundly anti-democratic. You know, we consistently are having majority governments that garner less than, in the range of 40%, sometimes less than 40% of the popular vote. And this is in situations where millions of Canadians aren't even voting. So, the actual persons who are voting for these majority governments end up constituting a very small proportion, much less than a majority of the eligible voting public. How can anybody claim that that's a democratic system? So I think we have to abandon this anti-democratic system that is basically, conferred enormous power on the conservative liberal duopoly for the entire post-World War II period.
Thank you. Question here about Canada's relationship with China. How would you, choose to work with China, or what would your relationship with China sort of be?
Well, I would pursue a foreign policy that is much less belligerent to the Chinese government. The Chinese people have many legitimate complaints about the way China has been treated by Western powers, by the United States, by Japan, by the United Kingdom. And they remember, we have amnesia in the West. Our politicians and our media have amnesia. There are many injustices that have been inflicted on the Chinese people by Western powers. And they remember these injustices, and it affects the way they view the world. And despite all of that, the Chinese government doesn't have military bases in over 100 countries around the world. The Chinese government isn't spending more than the next 2 or 3 spenders of countries in terms of military expenditures. The United States is spending far more than China and Russia combined. China isn't sending naval vessels into the Bay of Fundy or the Gulf of Mexico. But Western militaries, including the Canadian US governments, are sending warships into the South China Sea. So who honestly in this scenario, as between the Chinese and the Americans, has a right to feel threatened? Is it China that should be feel threatened, or should the United States and its allies feel threatened? I think the Chinese are the ones who should feel threatened, frankly. It's not to say it's a perfect government. It's committed human rights abuses. It's done some terrible things from an environmental perspective. But has it done the kinds of things that the United States government has done in the post-World War II period? Has it subverted democracy the way the US government has done? Has it destroyed entire countries the way the United States government destroyed Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Somalia, and on and on and on? And yet we call that country our closest ally. So, again, this comes back to the question of universality and ending the double standard in Canadian foreign policy. So I want to have a conversation with the Chinese government that is productive and seeks to find common ground. I think we should negotiate the return of our 2 citizens and a return to China, the Chinese executive who is now languishing in a Canadian prison at the demand of the Trump administration. The Trump administration has drawn us into an intractable conflict with one of the world's most powerful states. We have no business being part of that conflict. And I want to bring our 2 Canadian citizens home at the earliest possible opportunity instead of kowtowing to Trump.
Sorry there. I want to ask you, so Dimitri, could you just take a few moments to tell us how can we best help you get elected?
Well, the number one thing you can do is, join the party and vote for me. This, at the end of the day, the most important thing is the number of votes that each campaign gets. That's going to determine the outcome. And I know for a fact, every member of our campaign team is aware that all the other candidates, and there are 8 other candidates, are openly recruiting people to join the party in order to garner the largest number of votes. Joining the party is very simple. It only costs $10 for 1-year membership. You can do it 2 minutes online. You don't have to be a citizen. A permanent resident is also eligible. You don't have to be an adult. 14 years or older, you can become a member and vote. But the absolutely critical thing is that you have to become a member before September 3rd. That's the cutoff date for being eligible to vote online in the leadership contest in late September. And you can vote online. You don't have to do a mail-in ballot. You don't have to go to a convention. You don't have to pick a delegate. It's one person, one member, one vote. You can do it online. It's very simple to actually cast your ballot, but you got to be a member by September 3rd. And, it's not just that I need the people on this call to become members. I need them to go out and to find other people to become members. And I need them to go out and to find people who will recruit themselves other members, so that one person on this call ultimately, becomes 30 votes through this process of recruiting others to recruit others. So that this is really something that has to be a collective effort. It should be, if you really want to get behind my campaign, I can't stress it enough. That is the most important thing that you can do. And you can start by going to my campaign website, teamdimitri.ca, clicking on the donate button, and that'll take you to the page that you need to fill out in order to become a member. Besides that, of course, we need donations. We are second place, as I think I've already mentioned, in terms of the number of donors and the amount of donations. But the first place candidate, who, by the way, has refused to say whether she supports the party's policy on sanctioning Israel, has far more money than we do. That candidate has received a very significant boost from the support of the former leader. And I think that has certainly played a role in terms of fundraising. So even though we're doing very well relative to the vast majority of candidates, we're well behind the top fundraiser. And, to operate a campaign, it costs money. For me to come here to BC, where I am now, for us to have phone bankers, for us to send out communications to the 25,000 members of the party, we need your financial support. And, whether or not you can do either of those things, if you could volunteer some time to our campaign, become a phone banker, become a researcher. If there's anybody on this call, by the way, who is really good with graphics, we could use some really talented graphic artists. We have an almost unlimited need for top-notch graphics. So there's many ways in which you can help. If you have any questions, please direct them to me, and I'll have somebody on our campaign team deal with your questions as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Dimitri. Could we put up the URL link so that people can join? And we've done it in the past, but we should continue to do that so it's out front for people. It's easy to do. It takes a few minutes. You can sign up immediately, and at the same time, you can add on top of the $10 as a way to make a contribution. And it's direct to Dimitri's credit, you could say. Just very clearly, don't do it necessarily through the general Green Party donation, but donate specifically to Dimitri's campaign. There's when you go to the Green Party, you will see all the candidates. Click on Dimitri's campaign and donate to Dimitri specifically. That way, Dimitri is credited for that membership and for the donation. Thank you very much. We have a couple more questions. A person's asking why you, in terms of proportional representation, why you're behind the mixed member versus the single transferable vote.
Look, I don't have a real compelling answer for that, because I think they're both good systems. I'm quite content with either one of them. Anything that results in a distribution of seats that reflects the popular will, I would support. But the party, has done a lot of analysis on this issue, and I think I have a slight inclination towards the mixed member system. I think are you speaking, Robert?
So I'm just reading a comment here. I like what I've heard, but I need to do more research. This is the first time that I've heard Dimitri. So great. This is exactly what we wanted. We wanted more people, particularly in Zatoun's community, to hear from Dimitri and do their research and be confident in Dimitri. Another question here is, do you have an idea of which riding you would run in once you become the leader?
Yeah, so I wouldn't exclude running in provinces other than provinces where I've lived, but I would prefer to run in provinces where I've lived, because first of all, I understand the local issues much more in Ontario and Quebec. I spent 37 years living in Ontario, 34 in London, Ontario, 3 in Toronto. I spent 5 years living in Montreal in total. I currently live in Montreal. I want to be fully familiar with the local environment, the issues that matter to people locally, but also there's another consideration, and that is The Green Party already has, the federal Green Party already has a very strong base of support in BC. It doesn't need the leader to be based here. And in addition, we have now a wonderful MP in the Maritimes, Jenica Atwin, and provincially in the Maritimes, we've seen some tremendous gains in the last few years. Where we haven't yet, although we have Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Ontario Green Party, finally in the legislature of Ontario, we haven't seen the kinds of gains that we need to see in Quebec and Ontario, where I have spent much of my life, that will be necessary in order for us to become a real force nationally in Canadian politics. So my preference, my strong preference would be to run either in Montreal or in southwestern Ontario, maybe in Toronto, maybe Hamilton, maybe London, Ontario, where I come from. And unlikely that I would run outside of those two provinces for those reasons.
I'm glad to hear that, because that's, I think, where the Green needs greater exposure is in Eastern Canada. So on that question, how do you think, given you're being bilingual, living in Montreal for the last 3-4 years, what are your prospects for bringing in the province of Quebec into the Green fold?
Well, I actually lived in Quebec for 2 years back in 2000, 2001. And then I went to Ontario to resume my legal career. And I retired when I was 52. That was 2016 from class actions practice. And at that point in my life, I was basically free to live anywhere I want. I had a good career. No longer was a partner in a law firm. I was free to live anywhere I wanted in Canada. I chose to come to Montreal. And a big part of the reason why I chose to come to Montreal is because I don't want to suggest we aren't, strong progressive communities elsewhere in Canada, but this is a very progressive city, Montreal. There's a lot of militancy in this city. There's a lot of activism in this city. It's a very diverse city. So my point is really that I think the values of Quebec society at large, of course, Quebec is a diverse society as all communities in Canada. And there's a diversity of political views in Quebec, but it is, relatively speaking, a very progressive place. Quebecers are very concerned about the environment, probably amongst the most concerned Canadians when it comes to environmental issues and the climate crisis. This is an environment, political environment in which the Green Party should thrive, should absolutely thrive. I see no reason why we can't see a green wave in Quebec. We saw an orange wave, which was short-lived, thanks in part to Tom Mulcair's right-leaning politics, which the Quebecers, ultimately didn't, they weren't moved by. But I think that this is a place where we have a large natural constituency, and I think that we can grow here very rapidly. But we're going to have to become more than a party of the environment, and not just be one, but convince Quebecers that we're much more than a party of the environment. And I think that my platform stands a good chance of doing that.
I think, how do you view, I think it's Solidaire, the Quebec party? How would they be an ally of the Green Party in Quebec, Quebec Solidaire?
Well, the Quebec Solidaire, I have a great deal of admiration for Quebec Solidaire. If I wasn't a federalist, if I was a sovereigntist, I probably would have become a member of Quebec Solidaire. Well, I actually was briefly when I first moved to Quebec. But when I saw the degree of sovereigntism in the party, I decided that I couldn't support it because I favor a unified Canada. And I'd like to see Quebec remain part of the Canadian entity. But subject to that one qualification, I have a lot of admiration for Quebec Solidaire. And I think it's a really good thing that they've made significant gains in the legislature of Quebec. And I hope we can see more truly progressive parties like that spring up provincially around the country.
Thank you, Dimitri. So we have about 10 minutes before we have to end this call. Maybe if we could have a round of 2 or 3 other questions, that would be helpful. For now, I just would ask Dimitri, what is your social policy? Do you have has your campaign come up with something about healthcare, about addiction, about mental health? Where does that all stand?
We will be having more to say about those subjects in the days ahead. I mean, we have definitely talked about it in our campaign. So for example, I had Dr. Gabor Mate on a program that we launched during the course of my campaign called Dimitri Live, and we talked about addiction and the failure of both the federal government and provincial governments to come to terms with what addiction actually is and how to treat it. And we spent a lot of time talking about the opioid crisis. So it's a conversation we've been having, but we've not yet put out a policy platform that is devoted primarily to that subject.
Okay. Question here about the guaranteed basic income in Canada. How do you view it, and is it something that you would, support?
Absolutely, I would support it. I think the proper way to describe it and to conceive of it is a guaranteed livable income. So it has to be an income that reflects the economic realities confronting people in the communities in which they live. So obviously what is livable in Toronto is not the same thing as what is livable in Ingersoll, Ontario, or in Kamloops, BC. So we have to take into account the cost of living and ensure that the guaranteed income is adjusted to enable persons living in their communities, whatever the circumstances of those communities may be, to have the essentials of life provided to them, available to them. But subject to that one comment, I'm a huge fan of a guaranteed livable income. And I think we've seen in this pandemic, what we basically have in this pandemic is a temporary, the government has come up with a temporary guaranteed basic income. Well, this should be permanent and it shouldn't just be basic, it should be livable.
What would you say to our current financial system and the role that the banks have in that system?
Our current financial system is one characterized by rampant fraud and grotesque informational asymmetries. And what we hear about this financial system is largely mythology, that it efficiently allocates capital and is ensuring that money is going to its most productive uses and that it's transparent and that it's a level playing field. This is just nonsense. As somebody who spent an entire legal career dealing with the capital markets, as I did both on the Wall Street side and on the class action security side, I saw very, very quickly that that was simply not true. So I think we have to rein in the big banks. I think we have to have truly independent, vigorous regulation. We have to have people who are willing, prosecutors who are willing to actually send bankers to jail when they commit fraud, which almost never happens in this country. And very importantly, we need to have a public savings bank. I fully endorse, and I've said this many times, the idea of a publicly owned not-for-profit bank being operated through the branches of Canada Post. It would be mandated to act in the public interest. So for example, it would extend low interest or no interest loans to the construction of housing in communities where there's a real problem with the availability of affordable housing. It would be mandated to provide no interest or low interest loans to companies that are developing renewable clean technologies, to public transportation projects. So this bank, if it were truly operated in that manner, it was a not-for-profit bank, wasn't trying to make money, and it was mandated to act in the public interest, would force the big six banks to become much more reasonable with their customers. So a postal savings bank, the retail banking fees would be a lot lower. The interest rates it charges on its loans, mortgage loans, consumer loans, business loans, would be much lower. So in order to compete, in order to avoid losing large parts of their clientele to the postal savings bank, the major banks, the for-profit banks, would have to greatly improve the terms on which they do business with Canadians. So I think that that's absolutely essential. Unless we have a public option in retail banking, the banks are going to continue to ruthlessly exploit Canadians and siphon massive amounts of money out of their pockets every day, which is what's been happening for decades.
Absolutely. So Dimitri, we have about 5 more minutes. If you, as maybe some wrap up or closing statement that you'd like to make on your behalf in your campaign.
So sure, thank you, Robert. Again, thank you everybody for coming on. Sorry that we temporarily lost you. I can't thank Robert and Zatoun enough for organizing this and for all the support he and they have, and Zatoun have shown to me over the years. I just want to address one thing that I think, people will perhaps contemplate as they, reflect upon what's been said during this call. And that is, that oftentimes politicians or political candidates, when they're seeking your vote, will make big promises, but when actually put in positions of decision making, will compromise their basic principles and basically appeal to the lowest common denominator. I think my record has demonstrated that I am not that person, and the Palestinian cause is just one way in which I've demonstrated that. I've come under very considerable attack by persons who are, supportive of the state of Israel, who are advocating on the state of Israel, and I have not flinched. I've not backed down. I've stood my ground, and I fought back, and I've won. So my record, I think, should comfort you if you're asking yourself, can we trust this candidate to remain true to his principles if we give him our vote? Look at my record, and I think you'll see that you can be sure that I will stand by my principles. I'm not going to betray any oppressed people, whether they be Palestinians, whether they be indigenous people, wherever they may be. I will stand with them. And no amount of political pressure is going to cause me to throw them under the bus. That's just not going to happen. So again, if you have any concerns about that, please take a closer look at my record. And if you want to talk to me and continue the conversation, I would be happy to do that. I'm a little bit busy nowadays, but I will try to speak with you as quickly as I can if you want to have a further conversation.
You're an absolutely busy guy. There is no question. And that's why we have to leave you pretty soon, because you're off to another Zoom call. But I do want to back up and confirm everything you said about you don't back away. I know that. I've been with you working closely for 4 years now, and I've seen that, and I can speak to it. And in my mind, and I want to share that with everyone at Zatoun and Beit Zatoun, is I consider you as the grassroots candidate. And I truly believe that politics in Canada can be better. Politicians can be honorable. The common good can be a guiding principle, and that people can have a voice. We just need the right people to elect the right people to do that on our behalf on Parliament Hill. And that's just hasn't happened. And so I hope a lot of people here attending this call will move on that and will also bring in more people, their friends and family, and their network to help make that possible. Because Canada can be a better place. There's no question. So just to reiterate, please join the Green Party of Canada by September 3rd. It's easy to do. The link has been put up a number of times. Just remember, you've got 3 weeks to do it. Don't delay. Do it now. It costs $10 for a 1-year membership. And at that time, you can also donate to the campaign. And if you are already committed to another party and you can't join the Green Party, that's okay. Just know that Dimitri is going to be in a position where he can really move the whole spectrum to the left. For so many decades now, the spectrum has been moving to the right. It's time to now begin to move it to the left. And Dimitri, I believe, is the person to do that. So please, even if you're an NDP member, donate to Dimitri, because Dimitri is going to make your party the party that you want it to be and not what the leadership has made of it. And finally, please do share this video. It will be, it has been recorded. It will be posted on YouTube. It will be posted on Facebook. Share it with others. Plus, go to Dimitri's, Team Dimitri's website. There are videos such as this and many, many others, plus some of the work that Dimitri has done in his interviews. It's all about getting to know Dimitri and feeling about Dimitri the way I have come to know him, so that you are perfectly confident in what he has said. He's not going to back down. He's going to really look out for not just Palestine, but he's going to look out for every person's public interest. And that's the important piece. So I'm just going to close it now. A deep, deep thank you to you, Dimitri.
Thank you.
You have our hopes, you have our prayers and our votes. And a deep thank you to the many people who have joined us. Having run Zatoun now for 16 years, I don't think I could have done this work without getting to know the people who are the supporters of Zatoun. And I believe there's a huge intersection and overlap between the Zatoun community and the people who make it up and the people who are your natural constituency. So hopefully they will come out and be that what do we call it? That uprising, the rising up that we all need if we are going to be a better country. So thank you, Dimitri. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the moderators who've put this together. It's been great. So you've got the links there. Visit those links. Do it now. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.